Hey everybody, this is Petey from the Spinner Rack, and I got a request from, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Afro Cyphiz. Afro asked me to review The Hunger Dogs by Jack Kirby. Now, this would be not the great finale that everyone was asking for from Jack Kirby, but with any Jack Kirby project, there's always something in here. There's always some kernel of something in these books, right? So we have the original graphic novel of The Hunger Dogs, which you can see some of the Hunger Dogs. There are these characters here, the dregs of apocalypse that are under Darkseid's foot, and we see them revolting. We also see Hyman sort of leading the charge, and Hyman is also would be sort of the one of the guides for Mr. Miracle, who actually lives on Apocalypse, the sort of the bright light on Apocalypse, right? So this is ultimately, I don't know if it's ultimately anything, but this is a very cool cover. This is possibly, if the whole book was kind of done like that, it has like a Kevin Eastman style thing. I think there's a great poster of this that was in the ads. There's also another great poster for Jack Kirby's stuff. But to get to some of the things before I get to that, you also have the omnibus, the part 4, where Mark Evan talks about the struggles of the Hunger Dogs. And this Jack Kirby collector, one of the early ones, issue 6, they talk about the Hunger Dogs and Jack Kirby's ending. And they also talk about Mark Evan possibly trying to finish Jack Kirby's New Gods. So one of the things is in this book here, I think they talk about, before I get to it, because every time we get to one of these videos, I have to stray off into something else. Mark Evan talks about actually trying to do Kirby's original thing with Steve Rude, which would be interesting. And they had this article in issue 6, the Hunger Dogs You Never Saw, right? That Jack Kirby was doing a story to finish the reprints for the original New Gods, and he was doing a story to fill up the last part, a 23-page story, which was called On the Road to Armageddon. And this would have elements of stuff that's in the Hunger Dogs, right? So this was done by Jack Kirby and who was it? And Mike Royer inked. But then on the Hunger Dogs, and some of the extra pages were inked by Bruce E. Berry. So Greg Dixon, he decided that these things needed to be sort of uniform, since but both. I mean, Marvel had already done a book where there were 2 Kirby anchors on it, so I don't think it's a big deal. But they talk about how you could reorder the book to get to that, and they also do that get the original story that was done before that. So that's why I bring up this stuff in here. Is we could go through this, but this is the re-inked version. Actually, it might be easier to read through. But let's try it with this right here. So you can't really read The Hunger Dogs without reading the story that was in the New God reprints, right? So after Mr. Miracle ended, there were these reprints. And Jack Kirby did this great ad for it with what we wanted to see in the Hunger Dogs, a final fight between Darkseid and Orion, the Dog of War. It's such a gorgeous cover. We can get more of that sort of thing. But you can see Kirby got a little bit looser as we look at these other pages, right? And he does a story before that. So you have to even though they say this is jumbled and DC, but I think Joe Orlando reorganized it, you should read this story. Even though you'll be like, hey, I look at the new guys, look at this. This is real wacky. This is, and it's even got the air quotes. It got the classic Kirby air quote. It's the boom tube in quotes. And it's like, Orion is back, but he won't like our mechanoids reception, that sort of thing. So depends on how I think he kind of moved away from the quotes, but he was going back to the new gods, so he brought the quotes back. So it's interesting, in this volume, they went back to the original inking, right? So ultimately, both stories, which is in The Hunger Dogs and Even Gods Must Die, it's a story about the dregs of apocalypse. And so that's why I'm saying you should read this story too. And I go in a long way to get you to this. But let's quickly go through this, right? Because you're saying, all right, this is rougher, not the classic stuff. It's basically a story where the dark side we met in the pack, where he had the killing gloves, he's now mechanized all of Apocalypse with all of these weird sort of creatures. So he's kind of taken that dark side from the beginning that we saw, the young dark side, and seen how he's mechanized all of Apocalypse. And of course, Orion's there to destroy all of it. Right? And then he meets some of the dregs. That will lead us to the Hunger Dogs, of course. So Ryan is basically here because he knows that his mother is still alive. So as he goes, sees his more mechanized nonsense that is just all over. So it kind of gets you to what, how Darkseid saw how Kirby saw Darkseid, because Kirby was kind of looking at Darkseid as this person, obviously the most evil person in the world, but very much a thinker, a plotter, and basically this is playing to our sort of society, our 20th century and 21st century with all the technology. So there is, even in this sort of story, where he's towards the twilight of his storytelling, is something that goes back to us who are very reliant on technology. And that's really what the beginning part of the story is. Even though it's so kind of wonky, it kind of hints to that stuff, right? And of course, this gives you another human element, having the dregs of Apocalypse, where you have Orion saving these people, right? So there's a human element that's in here. Now, we didn't get the classic face-off where Darkseid fights Orion in the fire pits, but at the same time, we did get some other things, right? All these weird devices that are walking around here, and but this is going back to the Brucey Berry inks. So it's it's rougher to see how all this stuff is dealing with technology. So it kind of be that sort of fear, which is within the 80s, that everything was going to get mechanized. And of course, not everything is mechanized, but we're getting there. And then this is something where Darkseid starts bringing back all the people that died. So that's more for the superpower toys, right? So I'm not even getting through this quick enough, right? Even though this looks like fire, this is supposed to be like hot like sun type of, that's what light rays kind of use it. See him melting this stuff. Then Steppenwolf appears. Right, and we still see Darkseid with more technology. And some of this paneling Walter Simonson would use for his series too. Right, so ultimately Orion is going around there. He's taking out all of Darkseid's minions, was leading up to something that's drawing them in there. to get the story we'd asked for who knows how long. The final battle between Darkseid and Orion, right? It was a glorious battle, and here we go. We don't know we're running into it, but this is ultimately, I think, possibly when Jack Kirby handed us in, was the final battle between Orion and Darkseid. Right? And here we go. Chases them. Darkseid. And this is the moment now. It is not the glorious fight that we expected. But one of the things we get here, Darkseid is using weapons. Obviously, Orion is the one who's, fighting to the death. And then, of course, Darkseid is always a plotter and planner. He set up Orion. And so you have to read this because you can't really understand the Hunger Dogs without reading this story, right? Even though they say all of it's jumbled and moved around here, we have some moments here. It's the story of Orion running around on Apocalypse to save his mother, but it's all a trap for him to kill Orion, finally his worst enemy, Darkseid's worst enemy. But as he falls to the fire pits, Darkseid jumps. Almost to save him. And it's something that the father could not do, meaning the father couldn't kill the son. And this is something that Jack Kirby brought up, that even as evil as he was, his son was this great person, and even though he set him up, he couldn't do the killing himself. Now that doesn't mean much of anything, but it's giving you an aspect of Darkseid that we didn't know about, right? His wacky sort of logic, right? So let's get to the Hunger Dogs. Now I read it here instead of in this book because this is not utilizing the inks that because Greg Thiessen did. So this would be Greg Thiessen, this would be Mike Royer. So they went it back and restored it to the real stuff, right? And there. Now the interesting part would be if this was fully a story about the Hunger Dogs, the dismal dregs of apocalypse, but it's not. We just had them appear. They are sort of the human element of the story. They sort of rise up as the story goes on, but there's still another aspect to the story, right? And this has, I think, the final story that Kirby commissioned. Was commissioned by DC, but he had the Hunger Dogs actually, like in all these areas where you see these towns, or I guess it would be like Korea or even Vietnam, like these people that rise up and fight against stuff that's going on. Any sort of people that have been like downtrodden, that find even the Haitians or something like that. This is what he kind of was drawing on. Only thing is that we don't get a lot of that. We get a little bit here where we see them fighting, but then at the same time, there's sort of there's a lot of doomsday stuff going on, right? So they talk about all these chemicals and whatnot. And they introduce this new thing that's going to take out like New Genesis. And then, so here, if you came into into Hunger Dogs without reading the other book, you'd be sorely missing that. So if you're reading this, Orion is back. So just not, I guess I should put spoilers on this just so you know that it's spoilers. So Orion has survived the fire pits and his body being riddled, but he's near death. The Hunger Dogs are watching. Hyman is there. And then, of course, Hyman is slowly healing him. using the mother box and other things. And then he's ultimately, this draw him to his true path in meeting Hyman's daughter, Becca, right? So back to Armageddon. And this is where we meet Micro Mark, right? This is some sort of technology that whoever this character that we don't see is utilizing, right? And Hyman, this is how Hyman used to do. This is a great shot of Darkseid right there. But Hyman's the good guy on Apocalypse, and he tries to take the bomb away, but whoever this person is saying that he can figure out where Hyman is, and he destroys the bomb. But he's sending off, so see how kind of this jumps, there's no real setup, what's going on here. And see the size of the page changed. Let's look at this. Let's see if that happens in this book. And it does. See how one page almost fits? And this page is, I guess for some reason this one works here. It's kind of hard to read this one. You see how this one sits like this? So a lot of crazy stuff is going on in New Genesis, and he drew back, I think it's Lonar, back, and see all of the things where people on Apocalypse are just dropping these bombs and such on New Genesis. So Highfire Father's trying to contend with this. Right? And then, of course, Light Ray goes back to see him. He's saying that he's going to be staying on Apocalypse with Becca. And Light Ray gets his moment in the sun, sending out these robots that are sent out to destroy these dregs. Here are the Hunger Dogs here. They're kind of just the dregs of society in this book. And Light Ray sends them back. And this sort of edging, something that Walter Simonson used for his run, right? And there's another micro marks to another, what's the name? So, but that's why I said the Hunger Dogs is more about what is happening to them and not necessarily a story that would have been kind of cool, a story of these actual people that are on Armageddon in Apocalypse. But there's still some fun parts, some nice inking by Mike Roy here. And Ryan inspiring these Hunger Dogs. And then we finally meet this character, and we realize this was actually the kid who was in, I think it's New Gods #5, who's Isaac, who's didn't look nothing like this. So it kind of has the Dark Knight Strikes Again kind of feel to it, right? And Darkseid, and then Orion is trying to get to Isaac, and he's like the new Metron. We find out he was the kid. He was a kid in the issue 5, if you read that. And now on Apocalypse, that his cynicism has all turned him into this devil-like creature. But he was someone that was studying right under Metron, and for some reason he went nuts. So it said, then Metron was gone in the search for the ultimate object. And it was said on New Genesis that I was left charged as his alternate quest, alone, unaided, maturing, and then all this thing to revolution, and pain. And then Orion has to take out Isaac, and then as he's here, he thought he belonged on Apocalypse. Then, of course, Orion shows his true face to show the pain in his face, and he actually prays to the source, and Isaac is restored. Right? And then there's all this talk of love between Becca and Orion. Orion, of course, has this struggle that his face, he has the face of Darkseid. Right? And that doesn't deter her, but something else happens. And this didn't, I don't think, lasted long in the DC universe, but it's very dramatic. And saying if something happens to one world, that would cause these catastrophic events on the other world, right? So this is happening. This is on Apocalypse. Look at all this terrible stuff that's happening, right? So you have to remember, and it's one of the great Kirby collages of the destruction of New Genesis. And then, but the city is where where all the people in New Genesis actually lived, so they can sort of fly around the cosmos. Now, to deal with Darkseid and his machinations, all his craziness, that always leads Highfather to do something even wackier at times. You know, that's with the baby switch, stuff like that. And this caused ripples on Apocalypse, the destruction of that, since they're two neighboring planets, right? And this thing causes paranoia, and it breaks Darkseid's rule over the Hunger Dogs, and that's when they ultimately rise up and fight against Darkseid. So even though we didn't have a central Hunger Dog to follow, it's sort of, I mean, I guess ultimately is done right. But, you know, it's something we would have probably wanted just a big fight between Darkseid and Orion. And Darkseid, never to be outdone, in his escape, he decides to find Hyman and kill him, but Orion escapes with his mother and Becca. Darkseid is left alone. And then the city of New Genesis, the super town, is floating and finding a new home. And then, of course, we have Metron. I'm not sure why he shows up at the end, but he does. So there you go. It's much easier, and ultimately, if you read this afterword in this book for the Hunger Dogs, I think Mark Ebener just decided, you know what, just read the book in the order it is, because actually, if you look at these inks, they show the original story that Jack Kirby sent in the right order, where it starts off with this micro marks thing and testing out stuff, and let's see, there we go. We have every sort of Kirby thing has something that can relate to today. With the testing, like the vaccines, the micro mark is testing stuff, and then people running off and exploding, right? Becoming combustible. And you see just all of the stuff the Darkseid is allowing. But it goes back to Darkseid in issue 5 in the New Gods, number 5. But this, if you look at this, you get to see the original 23-page story that Jack Kirby did with the Ultimate Elf storyline of Isaac and Orion. But it's kind of, it's kind of a better flow here. But I wasn't going to put you through going back and forth, right? So I have this, which has Kirby's last New Gods story. But, I mean, I had to get this for the cover. So, while we're here, we got how much time? All the time in the world. You get to see, I showed you that. Get to see Theakson's inks. And some shots, there's no different. Some of the faces have been changed. You see all of this was different. This is similar, like that. Some of them, I think they had to use some of the other pages. So it's it's just something nice to have. It's not going to be buying it. You're not going to be. This is the moment right here. Orion finding love, and of course, the collage is killer. It's killer. So I also just like this format. Sorry. Also like this format. So it's not the glorious end that Kirby originally planned or something like it. Because it's supposed to be the fight that Armageddon, which is be the final battle between Orion and Darkseid. So that's that. There's some bits in there. You know, it's Kirby. There's always going to be something in here. You know, it's not. Again, it has some elements. So it has the characters as they were. It has the talking in quotations or air quotes. I don't know what else to say. You should get this, but there's other great omnibuses, and they also have. You can get this. It's pretty fairly easy to get. So that's it. Spinner Rack out.